Hello, everyone. I'm Father Alexander.
And I'm the Reverend David Marshall, Rector of All Angels by the Sea, Longboat Key, where it is rainy and cloudy and a beautiful day. And an hour earlier, by the way, I'd like to point out.
And it is also rainy and cloudy and took me an hour to get to work today because there was a stalled vehicle on the bridge. So,
Man,
then
I'm claiming rainy and cloudy days for me. It's the fastest because nobody's going to the beach. So,
it's
yeah,
a rare day where I encounter the traffic jam. So you take the good with the
man,
bad. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So you and I get to hang out twice this week besides this.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So
Yeah. In fact, we might even have lunch or dinner together. I don't know if you know, I was trying to invite myself over to your house for dinner. I don't know if you saw that veiled
I
invite.
I saw it more as an invitation to meet before Evensong this Thursday at the cathedral, because
Yes.
we're watching the installation or the first kind of presence of one of our friends who's the new provost. Her name is the Reverend Michelle Robertshaw, so we're excited about
The,
that.
the
And it's
very Reverend.
downtown, so I'm going to show you a nice restaurant downtown, and we'll get there before we get to the service.
So Christy is under the impression that all you eat is boiled chicken and white rice, and so she wanted to. What do you eat at an Asian restaurant?
I like a lot of things. I like a lot of things, but this is a bridge between. So
But not mayonnaise,
no.
and it can't be spicy.
Well, there's
This
there,
is the bridge. We are bridging. We talk about our friendship, right? That this and our families.
and we are talking about the God of the belly today. So talking about what I eat, I
See,
guess is appropriate.
good.
Yes, you will see the various things which I consume when we go to dinner.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to it because we attempted when we first met. You and I went to Demi's, which is a great noodle house,
Yeah.
and I, honest to God, don't remember what you were eating because I didn't know you were picky. And now that I know
Now you
that
now
you're
you want to
picky,
know the mystery. Now you want to know the
I
mystery.
do. I want to know the mystery, folks. I brought him a sandwich once, and it had mayonnaise on it, and you did your level best at being hospitable and kind. It was you. You
Right?
really did your best.
We
I
just
appreciate it.
mayonnaise and me don't get along. It's all right.
They don't, right, and that's okay. We're still
Uh,
friends. So
right? And it's still Lent. It's still Lent.
what? I
Yeah.
I thought it was just a 1 week thing.
No, we're doing it for the next several weeks. So
That
our
explains the calendar of why we're purple all the way through the end. Okay, now I understand. No, I knew that obviously,
so
but
our
yeah,
congregations and our colleagues are in the midst of Lent, and we had a very good service yesterday. We did the exhortation with the Decalogue, which
okay.
was a good experience.
Are
Um,
you sure it was a decalogue, or did you just do 9 of them?
well, there was a little bit of a accident that I had where I took my eye off the book and accidentally didn't say one of the commandments. So I accidentally
And which one did you leave out?
and I accidentally left out "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Um,
Yeah,
and somebody
yeah.
approached me after the service and asked, "Is that like still a commandment? Like we still have to be, accountable for that?" And I said, "Yes,
Uh-huh.
yes."
Yes, yes,
And,
yes.
and
You
I'll
do.
be buying
You left it out.
I'll be buying my
Yeah.
wife flowers on the way home. Uh,
Nice. Reminds me of my liturgics professor that she taught us that when you read, you put your finger and you follow your, so you don't do exactly what you just did.
Live and
So,
learn. Live
oh
and
my
learn.
gosh, I've done that. Have you ever skipped over the Lord's Prayer accidentally?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Me too. Yeah. It happens. It
So
happens.
so
And we
today
have a
though,
forgiving congregation that reminds me of a joke. Do you want? I don't know if this is appropriate for Lent. Moses comes down from the mountain and says, "I have some good news and bad news." Do you know this joke?
no.
And they say, "Moses, what's the good news? I got God down to 10." And they're like, "Oh, that's great. What's the bad news? Adultery's on it." So
That is somehow appropriate.
it
Um,
is somehow appropriate how that all wrapped in together. And I love your body position, by the way. That's just, folks, for you not looking, he's crossed his arms.
I've
And
I've not closed
I'm going to
myself off.
say, should we talk about Philippians? Would that be better?
Let's talk about Philippians. So
Okay. All right. Yeah.
with uh, with Philippians, we're actually talking about two different uh, key concepts today. The
Okay.
first one is this concept of the God of the belly. In other words,
Right.
and I would say the idol. not God big G, God little g,
Okay.
that we create an idol and call it God.
Okay.
And then this idea of our citizenship being in heaven. And there's a little bit of history to that with the Philippians. But let's talk about the God of the belly first.
Can we talk about the Philippians first? Because there are some people there who are like, who is
Who,
Philippi?
who is this
So,
church in Philippi? Okay.
who is the church in Philippi? Ever been there, by the way?
No, I have not.
I have not yet been to that town either. So it is a town that Paul went to, and Alex and I were doing a little bit of trivia about this. Uh, who is the Philip that named this town? Do you remember?
Philip of Macedon, who was the father of Alexander the Great. No relation.
Awesome. I had not considered that. Oh my gosh, how can I not call you Alex the Great from now on? How can I not?
That would be
That,
insufferable for everybody
that
else.
never entered my mind until, thanks, Philippi. That's great. Now it's in. Okay, so obviously it's an old town. It was an old town when Paul was there. And so Paul went there. He saw in a dream to go, and he met some really interesting people and planted this Christian church. Believe it or not, this town spoke Latin, that they were considered themselves to be a mini Rome, and that they were Roman citizens. They had all the benefits and privileges and rights and stuff of being a Roman citizen. And so interesting that he is still writing in Greek to them, even though Latin is their main language.
Mhm.
So he wrote this letter to them when he was in prison, and there are 3 different prison sites where he could have been, and then that means 3 different dates. And so somewhere between the year 54 and the year 62, it is such a broad range of when he could have written it, but he did. And he had also was letting them know a number of things, that they had one of his helpers came with him, and he's returning the helper to them, and he was just simply telling them, that he's coming back to you. He got really sick. He misses you all, and so I'm sending him back, and stuff like that. So it's a fascinating letter, and I really enjoy it. But we are in chapter 3.
Right.
How much of this? It's so short. I feel like we should read the whole thing.
Go ahead and read it. Yeah, it's helpful.
Do you want to read it? Or do you want me to?
You go ahead and read it. Yeah, because then
All
I'll,
right.
I'll drop a little analysis on it.
Nice. Good. Let's do that. So this is Philippians chapter 3, verses 17 through chapter 4, verse 1. Paul writes, "Brothers and sisters, join in imitating me and observe those who live according to the example you have in us. For many live as enemies of the cross of Christ. I have often told you of them, and now I tell you, even with tears. Their end is their destruction, their God is the belly, and their glory is in their shame. Their minds are set on earthly things. But our citizenship is in heaven,
Mhm.
and it is from there that we are expecting a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. He will transform the body of our humiliation, that it may be conformed to the body of his glory, by the power that also enables him to make all things subject to himself. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, whom I love and long for, my joy and my crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, my beloved." Thus endeth the reading.
So what's
Isn't
what's
it great?
interesting is that to understand the first part where it talks about the God of the belly, we were just discussing what is actually, I think, even more important, which is the second part, which is
Which
where
is?
their citizenship is, because they felt like, well, we're citizens of Rome, we've got all the privileges, even though we live in this particular area.
Yeah. Yep.
But what's interesting then is Paul is trying to say that your real citizenship isn't about these privileges that you have. It's
Mhm.
about these responsibilities about the way that you're living.
Mhm.
And so when it talks about the God of the belly, it's basically talking about all the sensual pleasures.
Yeah.
Just go down the 7 deadly sins and you'll start to see what Paul is talking about.
Mhm.
The important thing for me is when I hear the word, about their shame, it's not that they feel shame, it's that they should be ashamed. of themselves. The shame that's upon them is
Right.
what we're actually talking about. And I think this is hard in our society because when we hear the word shame,
Mhm.
it is very loaded. It's a
Right.
very loaded word.
Yeah. We have to be very careful with it.
We have to be very careful with it. But the other thing is that sometimes, I mean, we live in a society, we live in a world where sometimes shame is actually very necessary. And I'll give you an example.
Thank you. I was hoping you would back that up.
So
Thank you.
let me give you an example. If you are walking by kind of your public route to walk your dog, and your
Okay.
dog does some messy business on somebody else's lawn, and you say to yourself, is it really that big of a deal? Is it really that
Mm.
big of a deal? And somebody kind of walks by from who lives there and says, you really should pick that up.
Yeah.
They're trying to project a little bit of shame
Hmm.
onto you to say,
Hmm.
this is proper behavior. And if you're a person who responds to that, you will pick it up.
Hmm.
If you are, however, a confrontational person, you will say, make me, which is also where we are in our society today.
Wow. Right.
But
Right.
but like there's certain things in our world, in our society, that are the social fabric and the social glue, right? It's the
Right.
whole take your cart back to where the carts are kind of thing.
Okay.
You
Okay.
know, so we will sometimes see shame manifested in that way, and shame can be a tool to teach us.
Hmm. Yes. I understand your shame. Not I understand your definition of how you're using shame. How about I'll correct that. The It reminds me of another joke, and I can't quite put it together. But it's Moses, tell us how to live, and he gives the 10 Commandments, and they're like, no, no, what's the other stuff? And Moses is like, what's the other stuff? The more important stuff. What's that? What the neighbors think.
Yeah.
Right? You see, there's a joke there. I can't quite remember the punchline, but the idea is that we seem to be okay. God says one thing, and then right, but what will the neighbors think? And that has to do with social fabric, and that in the sense that we're talking about shame, that people do things because they're worried about what the neighbors would think. And so Paul is. I don't like this particular translation in English, where he will transform the body of our humiliation that it may be conformed to the body of his glory. I was just looking at the Greek when you were describing the other things about dogs. And I think these humble bodies of ours, I think that humble is describing the body and not the humiliation um, conformed. All right. So I just think it's better. He's saying we're acting humble and we've humbled ourselves, and
Mhm.
that he will then lift us up in his glory. And it's not that we're to humiliate ourselves. And see, this is where we're taking the word shame and moving into a different
Right.
quadrant of it, right? And that it's not to shame yourself or to shame others, that this is the way to be humble. There's another thing that's wound into this, and that is the Epicurean principle,
Yeah.
which, again, for any preacher, feel free to look that up. And the idea is that the aim of, I'm going to say man, um, that normally I would say, male and female, but no, this is really the point of man is for pleasure, and that he is to live for pleasure. That is the highest goal that one can attain, is to be happy. And happiness in that Epicurean idea is to satisfy one's desires and needs. That is I think, what Paul is arguing against.
Are
I
you
think
implying that's only
that's what Paul is writing about.
are you implying that's only men, or you're just using men in the general sense?
What I've read about it is only from men. And so
Yeah,
I would love
I'm
to
gonna
throw
push
both
back on.
genders in, but
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
I'm gonna push back on that because I
okay,
interact with a lot of young people,
okay,
and I interact with a lot of the media that they are consuming. And
right,
one of the themes that has cut across so much of what the social media and the trends and things like that our young people are
mhm,
consuming is that pleasure is the most important thing. And I say
right,
that in the sense of, if it doesn't feel good, then why am I doing it?
Well, I'm going to take it further. And by the way, in modern context nowadays, yes, it is male and female. Like,
Right, right.
back 200
Oh,
years before the
okay,
birth of
sorry,
Christ,
sorry.
this was right.
But
Yeah,
in today's language, what I
yeah,
would say
yes,
is there's kind of two sides to it. Is one, if it doesn't feel good, why am I doing it? In other words, there are many people who just don't like school. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't
right.
give them any pleasure. So why am I sitting in that classroom? The
Hmm.
other side of it is the best good feels like I should be pursuing those things that give me the most pleasure. And that can be something that's actually good, but we also see that that can be something that's actually very, very toxic.
Right,
And the undercurrent that I don't know if we're talking about, and we haven't really talked about before, is the place that sex has in our society now, where the greater the pleasure, the more it is lifted up and elevated as something that is a good in our society,
right,
no matter how the extreme presents itself.
right. I'm going to I'm going to sharpen your comment a little bit more, and that is, it is good if it feels good.
Yeah.
So, the idea of what is good is because how it feels. And as soon as it stops feeling good anymore, it's no longer good. It can be discarded. And that can be relationships, that can be
Mhm.
how you own a pet, right? That there are many ways to look at that. And that is the again what Paul is arguing against. That um, he is inviting us through this letter to trust in the Lord in all circumstances and in all times. He's telling us to rejoice. And again, I tell you, rejoice, right? That he is talking about these things that we need to follow, and that his cross of Christ, I think, is a twofold image or a twofold idea. The cross of Christ is what has opened the door for salvation, or what he says our citizenship in heaven.
Mhm.
The cross of Christ is also how we live our daily life. And that there were some, it's believed, some believers in the Philippian community that once they followed the cross of Christ for salvation, they then decided they could live however they wanted to because they have been saved. And
Well,
what Paul was writing is like, no, you need to continue the same humbleness that brought you to the cross is the same way you live your humble life.
this is, I mean, this is so relevant, and I wonder if Paul was writing this letter to the church in the West, what it might
Right now, like last week.
like
Yeah.
last couple of weeks, like what it might look like.
Yeah.
But the idea of, well, I'm a Christian, and because I'm a Christian, I can have whatever view that I want, or I can do whatever I want because God is going to forgive me anyway. Um,
Hmm.
but the other thing is let's turn a different angle here.
Okay.
Um, the cross of Christ doesn't feel good, so I'm not going to do that, right?
Yeah. So being humble, loving others as God loves you. I mean, that at times it's not a real feel good thing.
Correct. And so how do we then, if I'm a preacher, if I'm a priest of a congregation, how do I, relay this truth that being a Christian is not always going to feel good. It's not always going to be the mountaintop moment. It's not always going to feel like Easter Sunday. We need
Right.
Lent.
Right.
We need sometimes a time to understand what suffering means so that we can engage with it, be humbled by it, and then also move into what is the glory. That's why I tell people, even who come for Easter, is to say, I encourage you to, if you haven't been coming to church, come to church between Christmas and Easter, because there's a heck of a lot of the story in there that will help you understand why we're so happy.
Hmm. Yes. Um, okay. So I think he's saying this because our true citizenship is in heaven,
Hmm.
and that there are things that we do as citizens that don't necessarily feel good. Paying taxes, civic duty, those type of things. Following red lights, stopping at four-way stops. The basic things of life are not always comfortable, but our true citizenship is in heaven.
Can I take that one step further? Because I
Please.
want to, in combining the idea the of that plus the citizenship plus the feeling good, is that one of the issues that we're seeing in relationships today, especially in marriages, is that once the honeymoon phase is over,
Hmm.
the relationship ends. Because
Mm.
now what we're heading into is a time of serving one another,
Hmm.
and it's a time of continually maintaining the relationship, even when it's not as exciting as it was when you first met.
Right. Yeah.
And this is a metaphor for covenant,
Hmm.
with Christ, with God, that it's like, yes, I became a Christian and all these wonderful things happened and I was so energized, and I remember when the bishop confirmed me and it was such a wonderful moment, and then a year later it's like morning prayer again.
Hmm.
It's the commitment is what continues to sustain us, but it
Uh-huh.
doesn't always feel with the same energy that we had at the beginning.
You bet. There's that blues song, "The Thrill Is Gone."
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's so many songs actually about what happens when all of that burns out. And yeah, so same thing can happen with our relationship with the church, relationship with God. That there are times that we need just simply to stand firm, and I think that is the summary of what Paul was writing in this situation. That he starts with join in imitating me, and then ends with stand firm in the Lord.
Yeah.
Standing firm in a society like ours is looks like you're actually moving, because society's moving all around us and pushing and pulling, and by standing firm, it I don't know,
So,
it's Mhm.
would you say then, like, this Lenten season is an opportunity if we're talking about standing firm?
Right.
And this is kind of be one of the last topics we'll talk about for our episode. But the
Oh
idea of
no.
standing firm and standing too as other people move could really be a Lenten discipline, as we say, these are the practices I'm going to take on.
Hmm.
And yes, it's bringing me closer to God, but in reality, it's keeping me in a fixed point where I can be found by God.
That's interesting. I had never Okay, I had never thought about that. That with your address that God has given, or that you've given God, stay at that address.
Well, it's also the idea is like, what's one of the first things they tell you if you find yourself lost?
Oh, right.
Stay
Don't move.
put.
Stay put.
Stay,
Yep.
do not move and go off somewhere else. So I think Lent for many people can be an opportunity to acknowledge I'm lost.
Hmm.
Let me stay in this place where God has told me to go, which is a place of prayer, a place of sacrament, a place of fellowship, a place of study and almsgiving, all those things. Stay
Hmm.
firm in that place and allow myself to be found by God who is looking for me.
Hmm. It reminds me, I don't know why I suddenly thought of this, is that we were in San Diego, uh, we celebrated Easter, and then had the car already loaded up
Mhm.
because we were heading north to my sister in law's cabin, which is up in the Sierras. And normally it's an 8 hour, 9 hour drive, but it was Easter Sunday, right? And so trying to get through LA, it's it's always a challenge, particularly a challenge. We thought we had taken the right turn, and we suddenly realized that we were lost, and so pulled over. It was easily 9 o'clock at night by that point, maybe 10. And it was just one of those pull over, let's recalibrate, let's stand firm,
Yeah.
because this is when couples can start to argue and get very angry at each other, especially if one of those was up for a sunrise service at 5 in the morning, and now it's 10 p.m. at night after a really hard Holy Week in Lent. Right? It was exhausting,
Christy
but
did all that?
right, she had to
All
put
right.
up with all that. Right, and both boys in the car also tired. One who was getting car sick. You've been there. You know what this is
Yeah.
like.
I'll tell you a story later on off camera that's a very, very good example of that. So go ahead. Yeah.
Right. So as soon as you realize you're lost, pull over, right? Stand firm. So hug, talk, and then say, how did we get here? And then how are we going to get to where we're supposed to go?
Right.
And we did. And we eventually got to the cabin. and had a wonderful, wonderful week together. It was great.
Well, I think
But
I think though with what Paul is saying, there has to be the moment of realization where life is not just about pleasure.
oh, uh-huh.
Life is not just about pleasure. Life is not just about what I feel.
Mm-hmm.
But life is also about people and the relationships that I have around me that bear fruit. And this is hard because we have to ground people in what it means to love and be loved by God.
Mm-hmm.
That is the most important relationship. And being in relationship with God means that God is allowed to tell us some things and say, this is what I ask of you. And that's the other part that is so hard nowadays, is for people to see how they might help each other, how they might be present for each other's needs in relationship, instead of
Mm-hmm.
saying, what's in it for me? Like, that's the most popular question that we ask today. What's in it for me? What about
Mm-hmm.
me?
Right.
Being a
Right.
Christian is having to ask, or having to say, it's not about me.
Right. Right. Um, and for us, it's to be humble, and that our bodies are transformed into the glory of God,
Mhm.
and that all things will be subject to Him. And so, again, the subject, that is how an empire is run, where you have a Caesar or a
Mhm.
lord over everything, and that He is pointing out again, the one who loves you, the one who gave His life for you, is also your king, and the one that we are, as Paul is imitating him, Paul is inviting us to imitate Paul himself and how he led his life. And interestingly enough, before this particular passage, he had just given out his resume. He had just explained who he was. He's from the smallest tribe. He's from Benjamin. He's Pharisee. He was circumcised on the eighth day. Like, there's nobody more holy than me. There's nobody more powerful than me. And I gave all of that up,
Yeah.
because what is more important is what I'm doing now. And that is to be humble and to follow the Lord, because our true citizenship is in heaven.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, just a quick plug to remind people that the our Lenten devotional, our Lenten Bible study is up and running. So it's not too late to get it started.
So our Lenten devotional is called Bridging Lent to Easter. What does Jesus teach us? And for week 2, we are covering the gospel lesson that's coming up this Sunday.
Mhm.
And Alex and I are going to explore and then have you ask some questions of yourself or each other if you're in a group discussion. How does Jesus handle lament? How does Jesus handle rejection?
Yes.
And how Jesus handles rejection and lament is a way that we can be imitators of him when we also face rejection and lament. And so this is a really powerful lesson.
Oh yeah.
And I'm going to give all the credit to Alex and to God. I'm just the guy along for the ride here. That it is fantastic. So you can find that at stjohndivine.org, or is it .com?
.com/bridge. You
Thank
can
you.
also find it on our YouTube channel, but the ebook that you can print out with all the questions and everything is on the church's website. So I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for you, Dave, because you did help me put in a lot of work with that. We worked together on that.
We did.